there is an article in The Economist. It says that the next 5 to 8 months could be crucial for Ukraine. It points out various elements about the Ukrainian manpower, the ammunition that they're receiving, the likelihood of Trump winning the US election, and the possibility of a Russian offensive on Ukrainian. In the next 5 to 8 months, how do you see the battlefield?
Well, first of all, come on. You and I have been talking for some time now. How long have I been saying that ammunition is going to be a problem? Forever. How long have I been saying that manpower is going to be a problem? Forever. How long have I said that equipment's going to be a problem? Forever. Training is going to be a problem? Forever. So for the economists suddenly to wake up and say, oh, this might be a problem 6 months from now, no, it's happening right now as we speak. Ukraine won't survive another 5 to 8 months under the current conditions. I don't know if people saw what's happening in Kharkov right now. Air defense is down. The Russians are now able to drop glide bombs on Kharkov. Kharkov was always one of these places that had heavy air defense, and the nationalists and the Ukrainian military could operate inside the Kharkov city environs with a sense of invulnerability. Not anymore. Russia's dropping bombs on downtown Kharkov right now, taking out these targets. That's the end of Kharkov's ability to resist. Ukraine will have to surrender Kharkov in the coming weeks, I believe, because they have no chance of holding on to it. It will be surrounded. There might be some diehard nationalists in there, but at the end, that's the end of Kharkov, and that's the future of every single place Russia wants to take right now. The Ukrainians are incapable of mounting a sustained, cohesive defense because Russia will now bring to bear weapon systems that can operate with a greater degree of freedom because there is no more air defense capability for Ukraine. And so as Ukrainians bring troops up and deploy them and dig them in, boom, 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 they're dead. Reinforcements come in, boom, they're dead before we get to the battlefield. Commanders try to meet to discuss them, boom, they're dead. Logistical people come in and say, where do we put the fuel? Boom, they're dead before they even get to talk about it. Russia controls the air. And it's not just what Russia's doing on the battlefield now with these glide bombs, but it's what they're doing in the rear area with drones. Now they're just blanketing the rear area, killing everything that moves. And then you combine that with the fact that Russia's taking the gloves off when it comes to the strategic air campaign, and they're starting to bring in the Zircon hypersonic weapons, the daggers, the Kinzhal hypersonics. But now, because all the air defense is down, even the drones, which were pretty much put up there as bait, saying, here's all 50 drones, fire your $1 million missiles at them. There's no more $1 million missiles to fire at them. So the drones now are coming in and hitting strategic targets. It's over for Ukraine. So, the economists, they've never been right at all. They've always been anti-Russian. So the fact that they are now speculating that is sort of their concession that maybe Russia's doing something right. But even then, they can't be honest about the inevitability and the immediacy of the collapse that's taking place in Ukraine.
I've seen that you wrote a piece on Consortium News, the French road to nuclear war. And I talked with Ray. He said that you wrote the draft of this article. And
guilty.
Yeah. And in your opinion, where are we headed when you look at the behavior of the French President Emmanuel Macron?
I mean, it's a very complicated question. And it gets into the psychology of France, and it gets into the psychology of this European Union experiment that France has embraced. It gets into the psychology of France as they relate to NATO and the fact that France has always been somewhat intimidated by NATO because they felt insufficient, diminished in the eyes of NATO. Macron used to be someone who looked at Europe, looked at America, looked at Russia and said, I don't want Europe to become the battlefield between these two superpowers. And therefore, rather than allowing Europe to be subsumed by American national security and foreign policy imperatives, that it's time for Europe to stand up on its own 2 feet and define its own security parameters and come up with its own means separate from NATO to safeguard those. That's pretty sane thought. Amazing if you ever sat down with Putin, who was saying we need a new European security framework. They're saying the same thing. Putin's saying, hey, Europe, let's talk with you. Get those Americans out there because they're troublemakers. Let's just talk to you. We'll make this thing work out. Ukraine, they can move to the European Union if they want to, but they can't be part of NATO. They can't be part of any military alliance on our border. But if you want to integrate them economically, feel free if you're going to pay the price, but don't ask us to pay the price. If you want it done, you take care of this mess, this basket case called Ukraine. But if not, then we'll do it. But you guys stay out of it because we can't mix the two systems. But Russia was more than happy to talk with Macron about this. But then, the United States and NATO is the poison pill of Europe, insisted that Ukraine had a right to have membership, and Russia drew the red line, and now we're at where we're at. But Macron, like the rest of Europe, was hesitant in leading too aggressively into the Ukrainian problem out of fear of expanding this conflict. They didn't want a world war with Russia. But the United States kept pressing. And once you commit, it's like going to a casino and you get sort of caught up in the sickness of gambling. You go in there with $500 in your pocket and say, I'm only going to gamble $500. If I lose it, I walk away. But then you lose it and you go, well, in my wallet is an ATM card. I can go take out $1,000. But when that's done, I'll walk away. But maybe I'll win my $500 back. Next thing you know, you're $1,500 down. Then you're $5,500 down. Now you've taken out your credit card because you're not just taking the cash out because you don't have cash anymore, and you burn out $8,000 in your credit card. Then you call up the bank and you mortgage the house, and then you take the kids' college fund. And now you're so far into this thing that you can't walk away because your only hope is that miracle roll of the dice or the spin of the wheel. That's it. A miracle is going to save you. And so that's the place where France is right now and Europe is, that they've bought into this American nonsense and they're hoping for the American miracle, saying, you guys are going to save us, right? And America went, I'm sorry, we got domestic politics here. We got a presidential election and it's insane what Congress is doing. We're backing off. We can't give you that money we promised. We're backing off. And Macron's leaning forward going, wait a minute, now I'm by myself. And see, he can't admit that he's a nobody. He can't admit that France is just a middle-sized country with no true capabilities, that France doesn't have any meaningful military power projection capacity. France is nothing, economically nothing. He can't admit that because to admit that means that Europe is nothing, that this European Union experiment has failed. It also means that NATO is nothing more than what France was always afraid it was, nothing but an extension of American national security and foreign policy imperative. And so rather than admit the truth and try and save the day by pulling back and say, what can we salvage here? He's going to double down. He's taking everything and he's putting it on the table and he's threatening to put it in there. And what he's saying is that they know that Ukraine's on the verge of collapsing as we speak. It's collapsing. It's happening right now. They know it's over. And the only chance they have now is to get NATO involved. But NATO's not going to get involved on its own volition. So you have to trick NATO into getting involved. So the French are going to trick NATO by getting involved by putting in a tripwire force, 2,000 men, capable of being expanded to 12,000, able to be brought up to 20,000 if you bring in Baltics. And once you get 20,000 in, if you get the Poles, the Brits, and others to come in, you might get that number up to 60,000. And if you bluff the Russians into not attacking, that 60,000 can be converted instantly into a NATO force through an Article 4 meeting. And now we have NATO troops in Western Ukraine, project air power over, and you've saved the day. You suddenly have salvaged the situation. The problem with that scenario is that the Russians aren't playing ball. They've already said the first French boot that lands on the ground, we kill it. You want to put 2,000 French boots on the ground, we'll kill them. You want to put 60,000, we'll kill them. You are never going to get that force in play. And now France is sitting there saying, okay, if they do that, how do we handle this now? Okay, so we put the French forces in. Now they're going to attack. Now we're going to surge aircraft in. They're going to shoot those down. So now we're going to turn to NATO and say, are you coming to save us? And there's the gamble. Is NATO going to say yes or leave France hanging? And there's the question for Joe Biden right now in a presidential election year. France is putting him on the line. Is Joe Biden going to say, no, we're walking away from NATO after all the sound bites where he says, this is a sacred mission. We will never walk away. Is he going to walk away? Or is he going to say, God, I'm running for president. I've got to, we're not walking away. Unleash the Kraken, send in the airplanes. And now Russia goes, wait a minute, those planes took off on NATO territory. And so Russia then takes out all those facilities using assets that come from deep inside Russia. So now NATO says, well, we have to retaliate against them, and they send a strike package in to take him out. They hit Ingalls Air Base where the Bear bombers were. But some of those Bear bombers are part of the strategic nuclear deterrence. And they now just took out part of Russia's strategic nuclear deterrence, which under the nuclear doctrine means you have declared nuclear war against Russia, equivalent, and Russia's going to nuke you. And now Russia will nuke decision-making centers in Europe. It will happen. Russia's not bluffing. And then Joe Biden's going to be sitting there going, well, I'm trying to call London, but they're not picking up because it's a smoking hole. At Paris, no, they're not there either. Brussels, no, nobody's there. Damn. And the Russians are going, do you want a piece of this? And now Joe Biden has to make the decision. Do I want to sacrifice America? Because there's no coming back from this. If you fire the missile against Russia because you have to prove you're a man, everybody dies. That's the danger of this. And it's a real danger because the French are desperate. They have the desperation of a gambler at the table who can't walk away from the table. And they're getting ready to go all in. But the problem is, it's not just their asses on the line. It's all of our asses. And that's why I wrote the article, because it's imperative that people understand where we are right now and how dangerous this situation is.
The other thing would be these Taurus missiles, these long-range missiles that can hit the Russian soil, some targets in Russia. Do you think that would be a path to escalation to some sort of nuclear war?
No, not at all. Russia's already made it clear. They're not going to drop a nuclear bomb on Ukraine. First of all, okay, so they strike. Russia's made it clear they can make Ukraine disappear in a day using conventional weapons. They're getting ready to make that point over and over and over again now. So, Russia's winning this war. Russia's won this war. Why are they going to change the algorithm now? So Ukraine fires a Taurus missile and gets a lucky hit, kills some people, blows up a bridge, etc. So Russia's now going to overreact and throw away everything they've worked so hard to get to here? No, Russia will just continue, maybe accelerate a little bit more, bring in a little bit more pain, but they're going to keep the course, keep it confined to Ukraine. Now, if those missiles are on board aircraft that take off from Romanian air bases or Polish air bases, that's a different question altogether. That's direct NATO conflict, and then we're on the highway to hell. But Russia's accepted the fact that the Ukrainians are suicidal right now. You got to understand, I mean, it's an imperfect analogy, but have you ever done training as a lifeguard or anything like that, where you have to go in after a drowning person? And what do they tell you? The drowning person doesn't realize you're coming in to rescue them. They're going to be hitting you. They're going to be thrashing. They're going to be headbutting you. They're going to be trying to drag you down to save themselves. That's Ukraine right now. They're in the ocean. They're thrashing. They're dying. And anybody who gets near them is going to be dragged under by Ukraine. That's the fact.
Since Biden took power, if you remember in his first interview with CNN, the interviewer was talking about, do you consider Putin as a child killer? And he said, yes, I think he is. And just yesterday, he said again that he called Putin a butcher. When it comes to this type of name calling people, specifically when it comes to the leaders of these superpowers, Putin, what they're seeking in this type of behavior that they're committing, it doesn't seem that it's going to end up to anywhere good for the U.S. foreign policy.
Well, I mean, all Biden did is disgrace himself and disgrace the United States. It's just, first of all, it's just somewhat not only ironic, but hypocritical for Joe Biden or any American president to be throwing names around. Every American president is bathed in the blood of innocent civilians from around the world. Joe Biden, first and foremost amongst them, not only from his time as president, but his time as vice president, his time as a senator. I remind everybody listening, Joe Biden was in favor of the invasion of Iraq. Joe Biden is in favor of every military intervention America's made. There hasn't been a civilian population he hasn't been willing to drop a bomb on. So, if anybody's a butcher, if anybody's a killer, it's Joe Biden. But you don't see the Russians making that claim, because the Russians understand that Joe Biden represents the American people. He is the leader of the American people, and that That's not how you do business. You don't call people names. You have to sit down with these people and try and deal with them from a place of mutual respect. That's the only way you're ever going to get responsible dialogue, diplomacy that resolves these issues short of war. So the Russians aren't in the business of name calling, although they're in a better position to call people names than others. But the other thing it shows is that it means that the United States has no real policy. You see, if we had a real policy, with Russia, we would be focused on that policy. We'd be focused on executing that policy. What happens, I think you guys, people who are on social media see this a lot. You get into a discussion, somebody says something, you respond with some facts. They counter, you should respond with facts that they can't respond to. So they go, well, you're a fat loser who lives in your mother's basement. Well, no, but what does that have to do with what we were just talking about? Nothing, but they don't have an argument anymore. So as Russia confronts America with the emptiness of its policy objectives, not only in Ukraine, but in Israel, around the world, as Russia outflanks America diplomatically everywhere, Joe Biden is left with nothing but to say, he's a butcher. Makes him feel better. Makes him feel like he won the debate. But he didn't win anything. He just debased himself, debased America, and undercut any hope America has of trying to get Russia to the negotiating table. Because why? What incentive does Russia have to enter into negotiations with the United States when their commander in chief is speaking in such baseless derision about the Russian leader?
There are some reports reported by the Daily Mirror, and it's talking about several Englishmen are fighting on the Russian side. We see this division within the nations. Do you think at the end of the day, these politicians would take any responsibility for these stupid policies that are killing a lot of people?
Well, first of all, I'll just take umbrage at the way the question's framed. The Russians know it's not a stupid war. The Russians are defending Russians. This war is about 8 years of Ukrainian nationalist massacres against Russian population. This war is about Ukraine being used by the West as a proxy to undermine and destroy Russia. The Russians know damn well why they're fighting. That's why 1,500 of them volunteer every day to go fight. America had 64,000 recruitment shortage. The U.S. Army had to eliminate 24,000 billets in the Army because they don't have enough people coming in. They're shrinking because nobody wants to fight for America. The British, a shrinking army. French people are leaving. NATO is falling apart. Nobody wants to fight for the West. Ukraine's run out of men. People are running away. They have to go around and thump people on the head to go fight. Russia doesn't have to do that. So don't say it's a stupid war for the Russians. They are fighting for their existential survival. And if you don't respect that, then you don't understand what this war is all about, and then it's just meaningless to have a dialogue. The Russians know damn well while they're in Ukraine. They know what's happening, they know why it's happening, and they're willing to fight and die for it. Volunteers coming in. There's no volunteers coming in. Now, to get to the thing, look, I've said this in Russia and I'll say it out of Russia. I'm an American. While I know history and I believe that Russia's on the right side of this conflict, this war isn't my war. I'm not here to fight Russia's war. I'm here to educate Americans about the reality, educate foreigners about the reality of the conflict so they can better understand it, put it in perspective. But it's up to Russians to fight this war. So I always take a little bit of umbrage when I see foreigners fighting on the soil. As an American, I only fight for my country. I'll put the American flag on my shoulder. I'll go off and I will fight and die for the American cause. Sometimes that cause is a just cause. Sometimes it's not a just cause. As a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine, you don't get to pick. You just say, I'm here to serve, and you pray that your politicians send you on a mission that's worthy of the sacrifice they're asking you to make. So whenever I see somebody that says I'm a Briton fighting for Russia, I'm like, well, that's your business, but I'm not gonna applaud you. The Russians can applaud you. That's their thing. I mean, if I were a Russian, I'd be thank you for coming. But as an American, I'm like, well, what do you stand for? Are you British? You're not Russian. You're coming over here. Why? What's your motivations? Are you an adventurer? Do you want to come over to kill? You're war tourist? What's your true motivation? Do you speak Russian fluently? Are you steeped in Russian history? Is your wife from Russia? What brought you there to do that? And See, I never have to question a Russian's willingness to fight in their own war. I know where they're coming from. But when they say I'm a Frenchman fighting for Russia or this, or all the idiots going to Ukraine and doing the same thing, all the Americans out there that say this is my patriotic duty. No, it's not. America's not at war with Russia. It's not your patriotic duty to go and put on a Ukrainian uniform and fight in this conflict. So whenever I see foreigners fighting for other countries, it doesn't mean it's even outside of this conflict too. I have a problem with that because war. First of all, war should never be fought, and the best thing to prevent a war is to have a nation state do whatever it can, short of war, to resolve the problems that are leading to war. The nation state, the interests of the people, the collective, the government acting in their collective interests. As soon as you start inserting outsiders, you sort of muddy that water. Now it becomes something else. I think, war, if it's going to take place, should be pure. And what I mean by that is a pure conflict between two competing nations or two competing coalitions where national interests are on the line, because the only way you're going to resolve the war is when people redefine what their national interest is. All these people that come in are fighting as foreigners. They're just there to fight. They're just there to pull triggers. They're just there to kill. They're just there to get a thrill. They're just there to make money, but they're not part of the national interest. And so I dismiss them. I hope they all can go home eventually. I prefer that they went home without ever experiencing any combat, because frankly speaking, if you're a Russian at war with Ukraine and your government has sanctioned that war and you kill a Ukrainian, you're not a murderer. You're a soldier. But if you're a Brit who goes over and puts on a Russian uniform, goes in and kills a Ukrainian, you're a murderer. You're where you don't belong. You're killing people that you have no real beef with. They're not fighting Great Britain, they're fighting Russia, and now you're there, you're killing them, you're a murderer. And that's how I feel about mercenaries. I feel whether you're an American, a Brit, whatever, if you're fighting for a country that isn't yours and you're killing people, you're a murderer. You can't say that I'm doing it for a cause, because the only cause worthy of this is in defense of your nation in accordance with international law. If you're over there fighting somebody else's war, you're a murderer.